Well, hello, everybody. I am Amanda Coulong, and you are here for the premiere episode of This Week in Cloud Computing. I am joined here with Mark Jeffrey, my co-host for this initial show.
Hey, Amanda. How you doing?
Very well. And we also have here James Siegel, CEO of EdgeCast.
How that president, but thank you for the promotion.
President and the promotion. There you go. That's what I do. I give people promotions.
I appreciate that.
I promote things. And we also have here Yuri with... Oh, where are we? Wait a minute.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Well, Uri's with RightScale.
Yeah.
So, and you are.
Thank you, everyone.
And you're the evangelist. Is that correct?
I'm correct. I'm the ISV Partner Program Evangelist.
Okay, cool. And then also.
We have someone on Skype. Correct?
Yes, we do. David Hornick from August Capital.
Greetings.
Hey.
Hello. How are you?
Good.
So David is joining us from Sand Hill Road, which is basically the Mount Olympus of the tech world. He's deigned to join us via Skype. He's looking down on us from his mountain.
Someone has stolen my lightning bolts. All right, sorry.
So.
Well, we do have a movie coming out that's relevant to all of this. So anyways.
Lightning Thief.
Exactly.
Haven't heard of it. So I thought we'd start off with sort of an opening discussion after we introduce everyone of what is cloud computing. I have a very specific picture in my head of what it is, but I'm curious. I'm going to save that for last. So why don't we go around the table first of all, and then why don't we start with Yuri? Why don't you tell us what do you think cloud computing is?
By the way, I answer that question a lot in my capacity for RightScale. Unfortunately, I don't think there's one simple answer. It means a lot of things, depending on what direction you're coming from.
It's an inkblot word. It's like multimedia. People like bend the word to mean whatever they think.
Buzzwords.
Yeah.
So in your world, what is it specifically?
For us and for what we do, it's infrastructure as a service. Being able to rent servers, rent storage, pay for it on a utility basis on how much you use, release it when you're not when you don't need those resources, and not having to enter into long-term contracts. But to be more specific, that's really infrastructure as a service, which falls under this cloud umbrella.
Right.
So that's what we at RightScale mean when we're talking about cloud computing.
Okay. James, what do you think?
Gosh, it's a pretty broad question. So, one way to think of it, and I was talking with my partner today at work, and he's like, well, you think of it this way. Instead of putting the application on your client, you're sort of taking it to the mainframe. But the mainframe's not sitting in the basement of your building. The mainframe is just out there on the internet. But it's able to do all that sort of complex interconnected computing that you want it to do, and with some infinitum of scalability to it. So I'd say it's taking things certainly off of the client computer and putting it on the internet, and taking that level of computing to an extension to say we can now do things not just locally but globally distributed across multiple platforms with less capacity constraints. So that's what I think of the cloud.
So it's basically it's a return back to mainframe computing.
Basically, yeah.
Is that how you think of it?
Because that's the net business
Awesome.
benefit, right?
That's what I want to invest in.
Yeah. Well, so this is going to be my next question, was to you, David. What do you think it is, and what cloud computing companies have you invested in, or that your portfolio companies are using?
Yeah, I mean, so I think of it a little more broadly. I mean, ultimately, the question is cloud computing really about these sort of small resources and the idea that you can create compute infrastructure that sits outside of your enterprise? And it's certainly that, right? It's certainly that you can do computer storage or whatever, remotely, and that's great. But then on the other end of the spectrum are software as a service experiences that may be complete experiences. So is Salesforce cloud computing? I mean, in many ways it is. And as Salesforce then creates an infrastructure to allow you to build your own sets of services on top of their back end, then it starts feeling more like what you guys had described. And so I think that, to me, I don't really draw a big distinction between cloud computing and this sort of resource and software as a service where you've created this remote set of applications, because there's a spectrum, and I think that as everything moves to the cloud, and these things are going to become more granular, and you'll be able to mix and match both services and resources. So I'm probably a little more loosey-goosey about what constitutes cloud computing, but I would say it's sort of all goodness, right? Ultimately, it's about the idea of making things sort of more accessible and cheaper and ubiquitous and all of that, which is the value that inures to these cloud services and cloud resources.
David, I would agree with you because I think what we need to be looking at is what's the value proposition with cloud computing, because there are lots of terms people are hearing. Like, it's interesting, Yuri, for me to hear you say infrastructure as a service, because there are software as a service providers that say they're cloud computing. You know, obviously you've got Mark Benioff with Salesforce.com leading that charge. And then you have, you know, infrastructure as a service, and you also have platform as a service. Yeah. So you've got all these terms that are thrown out there, and everyone's saying, well, we're cloud computing. No, we're cloud computing. And then you have private clouds, you have public clouds, you have hybrid clouds. You've got all of these different terms being thrown out there as cloud computing. And I think more than anything, we should look to, well, what's the value proposition? Why use cloud computing?
What do you use it for? Okay, so I have two questions. Or sorry, one question, and then I'm going to tell you what I think it is. So are CDNs cloud computing?
We're powering the cloud. So the way I think of it is, yes, we are cloud infrastructure. We're infrastructure as a service. We fit into that category. But I wouldn't necessarily equate us with an ASP. I'm sorry, I hate to use an old term. Application service provider.
That's about 10 years out of date.
Yeah.
But that's all right.
But I mean, we have all the same elements where you can spin up a capacity. We've deployed a huge, amount of infrastructure and capacity. It's sort of sitting there waiting to be used. So I think we power the cloud. If you think of the companies that had their infrastructure deployed on our CDN, they themselves are running unique instances of applications, cool, different sort of solutions and services. Like GoGrid, for instance, is a partner of ours.
Yeah.
So they take their hosting service, which is a cloud hosting service, and they tie it in with our CDN, and they put the two together.
Okay.
And so we have a little bit of everything.
Okay. All right. So I'm a simple man. So in my simple view, I have a very practical definition. So
drum roll, please.
Yes. So last 3 years I spent as CTO at Mahalo. We've played around with the idea of using cloud computing, and we. Specifically, when we worked on Mahalo Answers, our initial intent was to put it fully in the cloud for the very first time. The way Mahalo works now is we have several data centers, so physical cages in cities, that we have people who attend to them and go and fix the disk drives when they fail and upgrade the operating systems and all that. So we are living in that world of managing our own data centers. We're not doing managed hosting; we're doing our own installations. So we have to monkey with wires and hardware and all that stuff that we'd much rather not, because it's not really our core business. But that affords us the transparency. We know exactly what's on all those machines. We're not, we know.
You have control.
We know we have full control, full transparency. What I would love to have happen is to not do any of that whatsoever. I would love for a magical company to come along and say, here, build everything just magically in the sky, FTP your stuff up, we'll manage it all for you, and it will be cheaper, and you will have the same level of transparency. As far as I know, now a lot of people claim that this exists. In our travels, we have not. Every time we've gone and played around with it or tried to do it, it has not worked for one reason or another, cost-wise or transparency-wise.
So I mean, the problem is the integration piece, right? Because nobody is building all of those pieces. So if they, clearly there is, there are plenty of opportunities to use a server farm that someone else is managing, and a storage farm that someone else is managing, and but how do you manage virtualization, and how do you manage routing, and how do you manage all those things? Nobody has created this end-to-end experience that sits in the cloud that matches exactly what you need, because to a certain extent, everybody approaches their infrastructure differently and say, okay, what I really need is there are lots of I/O problems, there are lots of storage problems, et cetera, and so I'm going to have to construct it, in a particular way, and so it's a challenge to try and figure out how someone can build a cloud experience that matches precisely what you need, unless it's sort of a little of everything for everyone.
Can I add to what David was saying? And by the way, we've deployed hundreds of these environments for our customers. And I appreciate what you're saying, but you're right. You can never take exactly what you have and snap it onto the cloud,
right? Because
of the way cloud infrastructure. When I say cloud, I really mean infrastructure as a service. Because of the way those environments are architected, they're architected for this general purpose, for this quick turnaround to virtual instances, for a more general architecture. And what happens is people that have their own physical space and that are setting up their environments exactly the way they want them make a series of design choices that are very particular for them that might not necessarily map across to an architecture that's more generalized to be available for a broader common denominator. However, there's a series of trade-offs that you can make in being able to fit into something that perhaps is not exactly the way that you had your physical environment, but that bring a series of advantages because of doing that. And that's what we find. It's not that it's night and day and that people cannot figure it out. It's not rocket science making the changes you do for the cloud, but it's a different philosophical approach. Many times you have what they call share nothing architectures that imply different ways to deploy and manage databases, for example.
Well, okay,
or
so
how you think about storage.
very specifically, two things happened to us. One, I'm not going to name names, but the cloud provider that we were building on top of suddenly switched versions of, I think it was PHP underneath, in our cloud, or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically they switched the core bit of infrastructure. They didn't tell us, and we spent a couple days trying to debug our application. And it wasn't us at all. It basically was incompatible with the switch that they made. So there was that issue. The second issue was unrelated but related. We discovered that the amount of bandwidth that they said they were providing us was not the amount of bandwidth they were providing us.
Oh, interesting.
We knew this because we did a backup. When we started doing backups, all of a sudden everything spikes up. And once it spiked up, then it went boom, and it flatlined out. And I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? That's not at all what you said you were providing us. And so we were clearly sharing bandwidth, and we were clearly metered and and throttled down from where they said that we were. So when I say transparency, that's what I'm talking about.
See, for me, the advantage comes down to cost. It comes down to access to capital. So Mahalo is a well-financed company. You could afford to go buy servers, deploy. You could afford to do that. You think of all these guys starting up a company with a laptop and a card table, and that's all they've got. Thank God for the cloud. If it weren't for the cloud, they couldn't get these instances spun up. They couldn't test their software. They couldn't get it up and running because it gives them a level of flexibility, I think, that is,
Can I take a contrarian approach here?
Sure. Except you're wrong.
We have.
I think David had something to say after
Yeah,
that. So go ahead, Yuri.
just to address this, and then I'll stop for David. We have lots and lots of customers that are quite large companies. What happens is you're deploying a new project, and you have no idea how big or how small it's going to be.
Or you need it to be big for a small period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
So do a huge
Scale up or down
computation and then
quickly.
scale it back down.
We had a global company, I wish I could name, that was doing a promotion around that we're going to give away free samples of the product. First day they launched this thing, 35 million uniques on the very first day, and the website ran fine. How do you build that internally when you have you don't know what's going to happen? We're really big with social games for the same reasons. Is you set up the architecture, and what you do now is you architect to scale is the difference. Is you look at, can this really dramatically grow? Because then you get into application dependency issues as that starts happening. And then you can, at some point, perhaps move it into a private data center. There's nothing that potentially stops you from doing that. But having all that flexibility to see what, you throw things up against the wall and see what sticks. And we're seeing that in a major way. If you look at the top Facebook games right now, out of the top 12, 10 of them run on right skill, for example. So lots of that is running.
So it's a function of time and money then, right? So it's not
agility.
just...
We call it agility.
Agility, exactly.
Sure.
Okay. David, you had a thought?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, when you look at what the problem you had with the underlying code changing, or this is why I think that cloud computing and virtualization are sort of growing in tandem, because ultimately what you need is the uniformity underneath it and the certainty around that when you develop to a particular platform that changes won't change, that create problems, right? I mean, one of the big challenges that people developing on the Facebook platform have is that it's a sufficiently young platform that it changes as Facebook determines they need additional X, Y, or Z. Then suddenly the rules change, and everybody who's developed on top of it is scrambling to make the thing work. And if that were the same kind of thing we were dealing with in cloud computing, then it would never take off, right? Because why would any rational developer say, okay, I'm going to exchange my own resources for a set of resources that may change? But what I at least see happening is that because people have to have this kind of uniformity around virtualization, then if a virtual instance is running on a server, then they can run it in the cloud. They can run it in their own server room, and so there's sort of this uniformity that's driving adoption. And it'll be interesting to see whether that continues to happen, whether these two things kind of continue to develop together. But certainly, where I'm sitting, that seems to be a trend.
Okay, cool.
All right.
And with that, do you know what else is interesting?
No.
Verticore systems. So actually, you can find them at Verticore, virtacore.com, or on Twitter at Verticore, virtacore again. If you go to my screen, okay, great, we're already there. Is your cloud hosting provider letting you down? Take a look at managed private cloud solutions from Verticore. More secure, more reliable, more redundant than Rackspace or Amazon. A managed private cloud solution can easily replace your current IT infrastructure and eliminate IT pains. Completely avoid the cost and hassle of buying and maintaining IT equipment and software. Deliver 100% uptime to end users. Configure and deploy computing resources in just minutes. With Verticore, your private cloud is hosted on the most advanced and secure data center on the planet and only uses best-in-class hardware and software and gives you access to virtually unlimited bandwidth. Verticore's team of experts monitor and maintain your private cloud 24/7, 365, freeing your internal staff to concentrate only on supporting your applications and projects that can help grow your company. Verticore.
I think this should be like the Howard Stern show. And I host my porn application on Verticore. You should too. Like, why don't we make this?
We actually, well, okay, I'll be honest with you. We're actually using them, or we will be using them in a few weeks for some stuff related to this show and some of our other shows. So this is our 6th show. I just realized that we actually do 6 shows here. So
we do.
Nice.
Let's see, where's
There
my
are a
list
lot
of
of
shows?
this weekends. We have This Week in Twitter. We have
This Week in Twitter.
Cloud Computing. We have This Week in Android. We have This Week in Startups, obviously.
This Week in YouTube.
This Week in YouTube.
And Kevin Pollak's Chat Show.
Yes.
So we actually now do 6 shows out of this studio.
Wow.
So
Can we call it This Week in Kevin Pollak? Just, come on.
Well, Kevin's got to be different. He's, look, if you star in movies and stuff like that, you got your own deal going on.
All right.
Yeah, that's the way it is. All right, so I guess we'll move to our second segment.
We have a fun segment coming up.
That's right.
Now.
Sometimes some fun.
Is the audio not
Monica, Mark Laughlin.
Group, the American original.
Issue 1. I'm so proud of my opening. I love my opening. Wow. So we worked very hard on that, especially the little bit where we
Mark's
inserted
very
the sound.
pleased with himself.
All right. One of the promises of cloud computing is that it frees you from the need to create your own data center. No more getting your hands dirty with physical machines, wires, and racks. Also, you don't ever have to pay a systems person to maintain all that hardware. Never mind to harden your systems against hacker attacks. In short, you're now free to focus simply on your application without hardware headaches, and this is cheaper because of economies of scale. Question: is cloud computing really cheaper? Or is this a big lie? I ask you, Hornick.
Yeah, that's, who do I have to be? I'm happy to put on an accent.
You can be Buchanan. How's that?
Oh my, what is this show
'Cause you always
degenerated
turn to
into?
Buchanan, so don't worry, Eleanor, you're next.
Oh no.
Buchanan.
Putting me on this, putting me on a show about infrastructure is a ridiculous thing. I am pitched constantly that this is the message, right? Oh, this is going to save people money. Oh, it's going to save people money. Well, I think that ultimately it's just one of the potential arguments, and depending on what you're deploying, it may be cheaper. But this is ultimately at scale. Then it is hard to imagine that the management and securing and all of that of a massively scaled infrastructure is ultimately cheaper on someone's cloud right now. I haven't seen a cloud that makes that safe and secure in ways that you can in fact save money without having to assign a ton of people to make sure that it's functioning the way you want it to. So yeah, I think that this is the future, but once you get to a certain scale, I don't think you're saving a whole lot of money out in the cloud.
Very good. Eleanor.
I'm not doing a voice.
All right, you don't have to do the voice.
I agree. I think it depends. It kind of comes back to the point you were talking about in terms of, for instance, startups. I think it's wonderful for companies that don't have the resources of, a Mahalo, to be able to test something. Yeah. And it for the companies that have to scale up or down for whatever reason, it depends on the applications, I think. But it really, there is no silver bullet, as they like to say. I think it really depends.
So I think we all agree that it makes sense for new projects, whether it's a new company or not. In the opinion that David expressed, I've heard it many times. Once you're of a particular size or you no longer have this varying capacity needs, it might make sense to bring it in-house. I would say the jury's still out. When I look at what some of the infrastructure as a service providers are doing, they're so optimized for efficiency that it makes me wonder, can you bring servers in-house and deliver a fully loaded cost of 8.5 cents an hour or less, including HVAC, fire detection and suppression, physical security, and all those things. When you talk to banks, I was in a conversation last year in New York where they took the entire data center cost divided by the number of servers. And when I say entire, I mean the power, the building, everything. And they were looking at $15,000 per server per year because they're going to be banks, not great at running the most efficient operations they can. Can you be as good at managing that physical plant as a company that does that for their core expertise? I'm saying I don't know the answer right now, but I think it's going to be difficult for a company who's not in exactly that business to be able to match that.
Okay. James?
Yeah, I agree and disagree. So I'd say for a bank, perhaps you're right. It might never be as potentially profitable, but for a tech company, I think that we can all manage our infrastructure once we've optimized it and figured out how our business model works much more efficiently, because a cloud provider still has to make profit. I don't know if they're all making profit, but hypothetically they should be.
Right.
And so look at Amazon, right? And it becomes tremendously inefficient from just a P&L basis to use their services once you get to scale. Simply because they are trying to make margin, they're trying to make money on this. So if you don't have the access to capital, and if you want the flexibility, if that's a greater priority to you because you're still trying to muddle with your business model and you want to explore different things, stick with a variable cloud provider. But if you figured it out and you're right on it and you're just now accelerating and trying to grow capacity, I think you'll be better off deploying it. I mean, what do you think? Why do you think Google customized and built their own appliances within their infrastructure and ignored all the hardware vendors and just did their own thing? I feel like that's the way to go.
Wrong. The correct answer is depends on the application in question. Applications that are bursty, yes. Applications that are static, not so much. Of course, that's just my opinion. But issue number 2. There are many big players claiming to offer cloud computing. From IBM to Google to Microsoft to Amazon, everyone and their brother is seeking to dominate this new paradigm. On a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 representing zero possibility, and 10 representing complete metaphysical certitude, will one player rise and become the dominant force in cloud computing? I ask you, Budnick.
You
thought it was going to go to him, didn't he?
Short answer, no. It's just such a broad category of different uses and customers and applications, and it's actually going to break up into different niches. Like we said, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service. Each of those are called cloud, and there's no way one company will dominate those 3.
Okay.
And then even within those, there's going to be multiple players. So I don't think that.
So you don't think there's going to be one, or
No.
Okay.
I'd argue that there is one company dominating the cloud right now, and that's Amazon.
Right.
And I think they're going to continue to have.
I think you're right.
And they're going to continue to dominate for some time. The guys who they need to look out for are the guys you always look out for, Microsoft and Google.
Yeah.
But I think Google's taken a very different approach. I've never personally felt like Google is really going after enterprise. I feel like they're just more appropriate going after consumer and small business, whereas Amazon is really trying to go after that enterprise space.
Well, they're going after the enterprise platform, they're bundling it with the applications platform. Sorry, that's what I meant to say on Google's side, right? So when you use Google gears and apps and all those things, you are using their cloud. It's just sort of implicit in, in building on top of what they give you. But David, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to be the one who actually gives you a number 5.
Correct.
Right, it's right in the middle.
No, I think everybody's got it right. I mean, ultimately, the idea that there's a single provider means that we've reached uniformity, and there is, that it's simple to develop, and everybody's developing in the same language and on the same base and whatever else. And so, it seems pretty unlikely, particularly since, I think it was a year ago, 2 years ago, I saw a handful of companies that were creating essentially cloud services strictly to make Ruby development make sense. And okay, so that's great. Are they going to optimize so that if you're a Ruby developer that you would go on those services as opposed to Amazon, or is Amazon still the place to go? And ultimately, Microsoft and Google are not going to sit back and say, Amazon gets to own this space. So if it becomes big and meaningful and interesting, then one of those guys is going to start buying the things that will make them a real player. And so I just can't imagine that this is a monopoly business, or unfortunately, it's probably an oligopoly, and it's the same guys again. So if we could come up with some new provider who could take them on, that'd be exciting. I'll fund you.
So related, and actually sort of related to your question or to your comment, From the chat room, we have, I think it's Phil Lelyveld. Will cloud computing vendors break down along X as service lines or vertical industry lines as trust grows within industries? So I think it's pretty much what you were saying, David.
Yeah, I think truthfully, it'll grow on both. It'll grow both ways as different companies try to address it and slice the market in different ways. Right? I'm a Ruby provider. I'm a storage provider. And whoever can create the best experience, then great. But it could cause some frustration as people are saying, well, how do I develop this? Do I want to develop this because I'm a small business app and so I should be developing on the Salesforce cloud, or do I want to develop this with the best of breed storage and server and compute and whatever? And so it's a complete mess.
And by the way,
It's a huge mess.
If I get you, they're vastly different offerings, right? David just said the Salesforce cloud, so that's Apex, a platform as a service versus Amazon on infrastructure as a service. So there's a high degree of confusion about what's out there, what's happening.
Oh,
so
huge.
we work on this and we understand it a little better. But if you look at it from the outside, and there's a lot of different things. Plus, there's this phenomenon of cloud washing whatever product you got to make it seem like it's part of this hot
Cloud
trend now,
washing,
right?
I like that.
Yeah.
And what about standardization and things like that we haven't talked about? I mean, there's so many pieces. And then you have commingling where you've got, other cloud companies that are building on, say, Amazon EC2.
Yeah.
So who's doing what and who's using whose stuff? And
Like a cloud built on a cloud.
you've got IBM's Blade Center and people using that for different things. And it's just, very confusing.
I feel like the Achilles heel of the entire cloud business right now is customer service and customer support. When you look at
agree with that.
Amazon, have you ever tried calling them for support? Good luck. Or Google, for
It's
that
a very
matter.
good
It's not in the
point.
DNA of the company, right?
Right.
That's not what they do.
Right, and yet web hosting, infrastructure providers, we're all used to this. We're all used
all
to
those-
enterprise support.
There's ticketing systems at pretty much every managed hosting provider I've ever used.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's fairly, and if they want to keep their contracts, they're very responsive.
Right, I mean, so
Well,
you
but
had
again, this
these
is-
servers deployed, right, at 2 data centers, and you had a hardware vendor, you can get a hold of Dell, or you can get a hold of EMC, and then you've got CoreSite, and you get a hold of those guys on the phone. You got your ISP, you can get a hold of them on the phone. 24/7 Knox, intelligent people to talk to all the time. We're your CDN, you get a hold of us anytime, day and night, right?
Yeah.
Try calling Google or Amazon, it's impossible.
Well, but
Right, I
The
think David
question
has
is
that.
whether this is a commodity or not, right? I mean, the reason that hosting providers have to compete on service is that they feel like their product offering has become commoditized, and so service will differentiate them. So what you're left with is price and service. So I think we're still at a point where technology differences are the bigger differentiator than price and service, and so as long as that's the case, then we're going to have this problem. But over time, that's going to evolve, and someone's going to say, "Look, we are the provider who gives you the best possible service, and you can reach us," and blah, blah, SLAs that actually not only matter, but they actually are followed and all that stuff. So I think we'll get there eventually, but right now we're pretty early.
But do you think Amazon can evolve to that? You think Google can evolve to that?
Well, Amazon clearly can evolve to that if that's what they want to do. I mean, all they have to do is say to their Zappos guys who they acquired, "Hey, you guys are in charge of this now. What would you do?" And it will change the whole nature of how they think about it.
If I can comment on that, what I find supremely interesting with Amazon is they took a retail business model and applied it to an enterprise sale, which is data center. Having worked in a data center before, those are long involved processes with salespeople and proposals and proof of concepts and all sorts of costly things. And here they come and they say, "Here's a website, sign up. If it meets your needs, great. If not, good luck." And I would say that's why they have a lower customer acquisition cost there. So the innovation is in the virtualization technology that allows you to do all these very interesting things with quickly standing up and collapsing environments, but also in the business model innovation, not requiring long-term contracts. And the other really interesting thing to me, having been in the data center business before, is that, like usual, innovation comes from without, not from within.
Right.
They were not a data center company, so none of the rules that everybody was following really applied to them, or they thought about it. They said, let's just make it what makes the most sense to us. And they came at it from a completely fresh angle. And many companies are now starting to follow that model as well.
So I think that they, they're good for two things. One is if you want to spin up something very large for a very short period of time. So there's no other way that just would have been impossible without buying the hardware or whatever you need to do beforehand. So there's that. And then there's also the small ball. So the small businesses that would not have access to, so they put up with the no customer service. They put up with the lack of transparency. But it works for them. They don't really care. Like we care.
So once again, because I can speak from actual empirical data from the usage that we see.
Yeah.
I can tell you this is a public figure that my CEO quoted last year. The usage that we see from our customers from September of 2008 to September of 2009, all of them running on EC2, by the way, their usage increased 250%.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and they're not saying, oh, let's pull it off the cloud and put it into our own data center. We see massive growth in a lot of the points you're arguing are valid, but there's something that really plays once you get down to the practical brass
Okay,
tacks.
so why doesn't Facebook and Twitter and all those folks, why do they have data centers? Why wouldn't they just spin up a cloud?
There might be an inflection point where you really are tremendously large. Or it could also be the fact that historically they started in a world where cloud computing was not already the go-to option like it is today.
Yeah, but sorry.
I think it's the niche. So I think, for instance, Facebook's going to say, do we really want to have all this storage? I mean, storage is so commoditized. Maybe they go ahead and they take all their storage and they move that to the cloud.
Right.
But they don't take their computing to the cloud just yet. So maybe they take certain infrastructure pieces and they move it on, but not everything. I mean, we're seeing a similar kind of trend with, so when you think of a CDN, it's content that gets cached on the edge, but it needs to reside in a primary storage repository. That origin storage location is moving now to the cloud. Most of our customers now don't store it in their own web servers in their own location. They're outsourcing it to a third party. They used to outsource it to the CDN. Now, not so much. They're putting it on Amazon. They're putting it on a third-party storage provider.
Interesting.
I would say this, Mark. When I was in the data center business, we'd go visit somebody and we'd tell them, why don't you put your service in a data center? It'll be in a lock cage. It'll be in a cabinet that's got a door on it. And they'll say, what if somebody pushes the reset button on it?
Yeah, but it's no different in the cloud. There's still a computer somewhere in a cage that someone can push the reset button.
And I go, well, it's locked. And I go, what if they have a long stick? And there was no answer I could tell them about it's safe in the physical data center.
What if they're like Mr. Fantastic and they can make their fingers stretch?
Yeah, because they go, what if they pull the Ethernet cable, the power? You could never set them at ease that nobody was going to physically harm their equipment.
Yeah, David.
Notice that question has gone away.
Right.
People put stuff in data centers all the time. We might be in the same kind of phase for cloud computing. By the way, I'm not saying it's perfect for everything in every case, but there is an inertia there that I see that goes away once people use it.
Right.
Well, and I was going to say the technology gets better and people get feel better about it. I was an advisor to OPhoto in the early days of OPhoto, and they were one of the first companies that said, all right, we're going to outsource our storage to a third-party provider. And in the very early days of that storage provider, they were backing up and they did something wrong and they erased thousands of photos. And suddenly OPhoto was in the business of saying, hey, we're your photo people and your photos are safe, had to go to their customers and say, oh, by the way, we lost your photos. And the worst part was it wasn't even their fault. It was the fault of a third party. And so, you can imagine that set back the industry for a pretty big chunk of time. But now, now we understand that third party providers are doing best practices to protect your data in ways that probably you wouldn't even be doing. And once there's a sense of security around that, then you start outsourcing. But it's a process, and people are going to stub their toes along the way. And I think people should be rightfully skeptical until there's sort of assurance that these things aren't going to screw up your business.
Well, here's a counterpoint to this. Actually, this is interesting. So I do another show called Bibliotech, where it's all about books and stuff. We had Anne Rice on, and I asked her, what was her process for backing up her files, and we asked her questions like nobody asked her, basically. And it turns out, you know what she does? She emails her manuscript to herself in Gmail. That is her backup mechanism. Anne Rice uses the cloud. She uses a consumer cloud offering to do backup, and she trusts it. And she's not a computer person, quote unquote, per se. She's very much a book person. So.
And she knows she has no SLA with Google.
Yeah,
it's a free service. They can delete it any time. They can do whatever they want.
And what's the value of intellectual property, right? You can get into a whole discussion about protecting that. What if somebody stole it?
Sure, it's Anne Rice novels. It's worth millions.
Yeah, and it works. I would submit this. We see lots of companies, large and small and huge global companies, doing huge and really interesting stuff in the cloud today. It's not to their advantage for their competitors to know how well it's working for them. There's a lot of things that we wish we could talk about that we can. Some of them are public. For example, if you look on our website, Zynga is one of our customers. The games run on
Is that
Rice
so?
Yeah. The games.
So Farmville and all that.
Yeah.
Well,
So
it makes
if
sense for
I
gaming
can interrupt, so
companies.
just Farmville has 26.5 million active users.
Yeah.
Active daily and 80 a month. And that's one game. And I said earlier, we got 10 of the 12 top games. These are massive systems running already. Again, it's not in their best interest for everybody to know how well it runs. I can only talk about the ones that are public.
Got it.
That's where we are today. We stand on the, what's it called, the catbird seat, or I forgot the expression for that. We get to see a lot of the stuff that's not publicly yet, but we see this massive trending for the growth. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So issue number 3. Voice is getting a little scratchy, but anyway. How do I know that cloud vendors are actually providing me with the unshared processing, memory, and bandwidth they say they are? How do you benchmark cloud services against one another? I ask you, Siegel.
Well, I'd say they're probably not providing you with whatever it is they say they are.
Really? That's really skeptical. All of them?
Great.
I'll be the devil's advocate. What the
Okay.
heck? You know, in the hosting world, you used to say to somebody, "Oh yeah, you've got unlimited storage, unlimited emails, all this stuff," and hypothetically that capacity was there, but it wasn't really put to practical use until someone actually uses it, and you know that you really can scale to that. So I'd say that it's an early field, right? So I don't necessarily know if somebody's giving you virtually unlimited bandwidth or virtually unlimited storage or virtually that they really have virtually unlimited anything. To benchmark it though, I'd say third-party testing services that exist today are good but not great, and there needs to be a ton more. We use Gomez and Keynote as 2 key resources for testing the uptime, availability, and speed and performance
We use
of a
Pingdom
network.
as well. So
And
that's
Pingdom's really good too, just for uptime pinging. So I think you need to do that. I think to the degree that you can also, you know, set up your own level of sort of internal alerts and notifications, it's probably good to set up your own scripts that test things from a couple of different places. You know, I never totally depend on any third party. We've had to build all of our own scripting and monitoring services in-house. Plus, we use every service provider we can provide. You know, so yeah.
I think it's just ask. To your point, you know, when someone says to you, "Oh, virtually unlimited," well, no, that's impossible, or at least, you know, seems pretty impossible. So just ask for a specific number.
But how do you compare, like, say, Amazon to, you know, Microsoft's offering to Google? Like, is there someone who sort of, is there a service which is actually looked at?
I think This Week in Cloud Computing needs to do that.
No, I mean, like, on a point-by-point basis, the bandwidth, the storage, the processing, you know, is really sort of, you know, dug through that. Does
What's
that
the
exist?
metric?
Does anyone in the audience
Is it
know?
performance? Is it price? Is it features?
Well, all of it. I mean, just someone who's like really, I mean, I want like a consumer reports, I guess, on all these things.
Yeah.
And to date, I haven't seen
Analyst
one yet.
firms?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And by the way, it's not
are
just
you
been-
guys aware of one? That's my biggest question, I guess.
Not somebody that's comparing it across the board. By the way, I agree with everything that James was talking about in terms of how you have to approach it, externally monitoring things.
Yeah.
I would add one more, that when you build an environment in the cloud, a lot of people think that just storing in the cloud means it's going to work if you got, you know, 100x the expected visitors that you originally had, that you thought you were going to have before. I would add load testing everything also too.
Yeah.
And we have a partner called SOASTA, that you actually want to put in an environment, SOASTA. You want to actually put an environment through the paces to see that in fact it will do what you think it's going to do, because again, you don't have control of that hardware. I think it's an interesting idea, Mark, to actually compare that across different providers, because it's not a one-time test, right? It's a time series of what was the latency today, this week, this month between my computers and the local storage for the cloud, externally into the cloud, between 2 servers in the cloud, my database,
Yeah, that's a very good
application
point.
servers. There's a lot of variables there that can be changing all the time.
Yeah, so that can actually change over time as well. And
Within the CDN world, we're compared all day long, right? You can go type in, you know, CDN comparison. You'll find a gazillion people that are doing it all day long and monitoring the differences. But I think that's a niche, right?
I saw a cloud comparison, but I actually didn't bring it in because I was kind of like, this is not really what I'm looking at. Sorry, a CDN comparison that purported to be a cloud comparison.
Yes.
And I didn't bring it in because I was like, well, yes, sort of. But
We ranked really well on that, by the
Yeah,
way.
we did. Actually.
You were number
great.
one,
You guys did
right?
great.
We should have been, but we were number 2. Who knows whether or not that was as accurate as it could have been. But you know, regardless, I think to your point, you really need to be vigilant about it. The one thing I've experienced as an entrepreneur dealing with vendors all day long is that I'm constantly promised that the spec is a certain thing.
Yeah.
And you know, my company is growing so fast that we break everything. I mean, we break servers, switches, routers. We break everything.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm told by a certain vendor that this switch does this or this router does this, and sure enough, you know, within a few weeks, I've completely destroyed it. So, I think to your point, you really have to put things in the lab, and that's where the cloud comes in handy. Although you can't test hardware in the cloud.
there's one more wrinkle I'll add here that we do and that we advise all our customers to do, to architect for failure. So have things running in multiple data centers within a single provider or multiple providers, and actually you can even have automated procedures in place that will react without human intervention for my database server fails, my application server, the whole data center goes down. Because you can now have multiple environments that are a lot more automated.
Now you've done a really great job of not plugging RightScale.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to ask you to plug it right now. What specifically do you cover part of this?
I'm sorry, I need to speak from my experience, so I can't help but talk about the company. It'd be very difficult to
No,
come
I
at it
actually,
from a
I think
purely
it'll be
neutral-
interesting.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people might not know about you guys.
So we have a cloud management platform.
Yeah.
Companies like Amazon with their infrastructure as a service product, they will rent you servers by the hour, they will rent you storage per gig per month. So think of those as building blocks that you use to put systems together. But it's the same things we use to know today, the servers, the storage, the IP networks that tie them together. What we have is a management platform that allows you to orchestrate, to manage all the things that would you otherwise be doing manually that take quite a bit of time. And we have a library of pre-built components so that if you need to stand up databases, application servers, load balancers, all those things, and that's what I actually work on. On the ISV Partner Program, we have relationships with a lot of commercial software companies to make their enterprise software available through RightScale in this way so you can easily deploy it. And because of that, we get to really be hands-on involved with a lot of these things, and I can speak about it from actual empirical clean knowledge.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this, Dave?
I've got absolutely nothing to add.
Okay. Rock on. It's good to know Sand Hill
Issue
Road.
number 4.
Issue number 4. I'm not going to do the voice. So.
Oh, come on.
You want the voice? Do you want
we
the
want
voice?
the voice.
Okay. Issue number 4.
Nice.
Is the cloud more vulnerable to attack? Yes or no, Yuri?
I say it's
Yes or no? No, I'm just kidding.
the same level of vulnerability. You have more options on how to react, is what I would say.
More vulnerability.
No, the same in terms of
same.
vulnerability. You can be targeted whether you're in a data center or you're in the cloud. You have more options in how you can react to things.
Really?
See, I would say
not buying that.
that's not the case. I would say that there is a certain degree of increased vulnerability in the sense that we experienced this at Six Apart. Six Apart was hosting a particular blog that was in some way controversial to a set of angry Russians, and the result was a denial of service attack that not only took down all of Six Apart, but took down all of the other enterprise applications that were hosted in the same facility, right? And so ultimately, I think the same thing holds true of hosting facilities in the cloud for whatever. I mean, I think that the challenge is that if these things have any set of shared infrastructure, there's going to be a challenge if one's going down, if there's a fire, if there's whatever. And so if there's increased reason to attack either the entirety of that infrastructure or a particular piece of it, whether you have anything to do with it, there's a greater risk to the companies that are living in the cloud. And that now I think there's a way to counteract that. I think that the companies that are engaged in businesses to provide these services have a lot more incentive to figure out how to protect the companies that they're hosting. But I do think that there's an added degree of risk.
And also, whenever you have anything that's new and hot, it's the newest thing, you're going to have people that are going to focus on trying to break that. So from a security standpoint, from a hacking standpoint, there are plenty of articles that show that there's a focus on the cloud.
Yeah.
To prove a point.
I mean, so I think, as the CDN, we have 1,200 customers. We power some of the biggest sites in the world. Alexa Top 100. We have site 20, 15, 30, and all those. And we're getting attacked constantly. Mm-hmm. But we have a very specific service. So yeah, it's cloud service, but it's very specific. So we know how to protect our specific service. I think if you're a broader service provider for cloud, and you've got apps, and people are opening ports, and people are doing funky things, you're just exposing yourself to so many different potential ways that you can be attacked. It's just a lot tougher to protect yourself.
I mean, look, bottom line, if basically I have an app, it's all shared infrastructure, right? So you got a bunch of machines, you have a bunch of cross connects between those machines. Bottom line, that's what you're looking at. Mm-hmm. If I am in there, and I've got an application on one of those machines, and I've got lots of ways into the other machines through various cross connects, it's a lot easier. I mean, I can't imagine that is not easier. I'm sorry, but if, as opposed to I have a cage somewhere and there is no wire between your infrastructure and mine. Sure, there's the internet, but there's no direct cross connect between us, and there's no shared hardware, there's no shared resources. So I just think by the nature of it, there is absolutely no way that it can not be less secure. I know, terrible English sentence there, but what I'm saying is it's got to be, it's by its definition, it has to be less secure.
Yeah.
I think they will get better over time. But I mean, Google had an incident in December, right, where they got hacked by the Chinese, and there was a considerable debate over whether their consumer cloud computing infrastructure had been hacked and whether their customers' data had been hacked. Now, Google says no. Google emphatically on their blog says no, but it's still debated. And you know, that's actually what brought this question up. So what do you guys think about that? Is Google full of it, or?
Let me turn that into a hypothetical that maybe we can discuss. Say you have your own mail server and your own data center.
Yeah.
And you also get hacked. Do you have the depth of expertise on DNS, on protocols, on network security, or maybe on hardware security if there's no decent physical access to really decompose that incident the same way that a major provider could do, where they have a budget for payroll such that they can afford to keep experts in multiple
No, I'm not an expert in that, but
at
Mahalo employs people who are experts at that. So.
Yeah.
And that also depends on whether you're running Splunk.
Yeah. There's always that.
All right, sorry. I felt like everybody else got to pitch something.
Go ahead, Dave, you know, if you feel you need to pitch something from Sand Hill Road, please help. by all means. Go ahead.
My point is that it's not better and worse, it's different types of challenges. On the DDoS front, even if you're in your own data center, you still have a router that you share with the other people in your floor.
Yeah.
So if somebody else in your floor gets hit, depends on how good that network provider is to you. So I don't see a qualitative difference there between one and the other.
You don't think that because there's shared resources inside the network, that there's an inherently greater risk?
It gets very much, like it always happens in technology.
That?
Like you always say in technology, it gets very much down to the exact details. What is that
but I mean,
network
if there's
topology?
more paths, basically there's more doors. So if there's more doors, there's more ways in.
Let me restate. If you're kissing one person or you're kissing lots of people, in which case are you more likely vulnerable to a virus?
You know, David, I wasn't going to go there, but since you have,
Well, we did just have Valentine's
By the
Day.
way, and I don't want to take the position that the cloud is perfect or best at everything either.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there's different challenges.
I mean, look, this is another one of these technologies like Android that I'm personally excited about, but I also think it's not perfect, and I think that discussing
That's what
the
we're
warts
here to discuss.
is good, and it's part of it growing. So,
Indeed.
The correct answer is it's debatable, and that ends this segment. So I guess we'll go on to our next segment. I'm not sure how this one's going to work out, but I figure we'll give it a try.
Cloud or no cloud?
Cloud or not cloud? It's actually not cloud, but I guess first show we're still getting our little opening segments right. So basically, you're going to read off. You have the same list I do, right?
I do.
So you're going to read off basically an application, and we're going to discuss whether it's best implemented in the cloud or not.
Number one,
And I know the answer to this one, so I'm just going to be silent.
Mahalo Answers.
Mahalo Answers.
Possibly be an answer, by the way.
Or any answers.
Or any Answers product.
product, sure. I mean, VARC, Quora, all these guys.
Mark had to have his
Answers.
plug too.
Well, it's just I know the answer to this, and I've personally been through a lot of pain on it, so I want to discuss my pain. No, I'm just kidding.
So cloud.
So go ahead. What do you guys
or
think?
no
An Answers product?
I would say it depends on the specific needs of the product. And it also depends on budget, of course, and also on the core competencies of the team that's building it and deploying it and managing it.
Okay, so in general, you have a lot of writes going on. Basically, you have a lot of reads, obviously, but also a lot of writes and a lot of stuff that's very dynamic. So people are voting things up and down. Answers are coming in real time, so you have to see. People need to see the answers pop up in real time, just like it's very much like Facebook, really. To be honest with you, it's got a lot
It's a
in
big
common with that.
database bound type of
We're
issue.
actually, well, it doesn't actually use a database. We do in some instances, but we're using things like Cassandra and
so key value store
exactly
kind of thing.
a lot of tables.
This conversation has gotten fascinating. I just want to say.
I was wondering how geeky it was going to get.
Oh, come on, we got to geek out a little bit.
It's cloud computing.
It's cloud computing, Yeah, exactly. It's not Oprah.
Okay, so Mark, it's one thing to ask the question, but you already gave us the answer earlier in the show when you said, I really wanted to run this in cloud, but it couldn't work. It didn't work well, and now you've explained why, which is, when there are a ton of reads and you need the system to respond quickly and et cetera, that I take it your sense is that that's not a good application to sit in the cloud, particularly when you have a database in one instance and a server somewhere else, et cetera, and you need the stuff to be communicating quickly together, et cetera. So I would agree with you, Mark.
Wow, way to get your nerd on there. Very impressive.
Well, I mean, to be honest, so you guys, I'll explain. So this is exactly why. The reason why it didn't work is because we built it initially on top of Hadoop, or more specifically HBase, which is sort of a database that runs on top of Hadoop, which is a technology which is very much like Google's Bigtable. It's an open source implementation, by and large, of Google's Bigtable. Basically, it's a big jump table in the sky, bottom line. In order to make HBase run effectively, we had to run very large instances on Amazon's cloud infrastructure. Those run 80 cents per computing hour, as opposed to like the next one down is 40 cents, and I think there's 20 cents, if I remember their pricing correctly. But basically, and you have to run several of these very large, extra large instances, and the cost of running those to make Hadoop run or HBase run effectively was enormous. We had this meter ticking, and as usage increased, we had to like dynamically spin up more region servers. That's the real reason why we basically decided to back off, and we built our own Hadoop cluster on our own hardware. It was infinitely more cost effective. So that was very sort of geeky detail. That was exactly why we didn't use it for answers. But you could disagree. I mean, you could do it in different architectures. So there's definitely different takes on this. I mean, you clearly have clients that you're working with that are doing very dynamic things, very much like answers. I mean, I got to imagine Farmville and some of these other things have a lot of rights and a lot of sort of the same sort of characteristics. So I would expect actually for you to argue against me.
Well, you're the expert on it. I don't know.
Really?
And I know I don't know how the thing is architected, so it
Yeah.
would be difficult to without your insights on how it works. And by the way, there's many things that are not ideal for the cloud, and this might be one of those. You can't say it's perfect for everything in every case.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
So, and by the way, although it's obviously going to change now that Aardvark's part of Google, and so whatever, but the pieces of Aardvark lived in the cloud, and so it just depends on how you want to architect the thing, and what are the pieces that it's most cost effective to have sitting out in the cloud and don't slow down the service, etc. And so there are ways to architect it that would allow that to be a possibility. It just depends.
Okay. Okay. Let's run through the rest.
All
of
right.
them.
Next, study at home.
Study at home.
SETI. So basically crunching, like the big observatory, they're looking for aliens. Mm-hmm. So anyone who doesn't know, SETI at home, so it's search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Yeah. They got a bunch of radio antennas that are pointed at the sky. Arecibo. That's the biggest one. So the movie Contact, that was the thing. And so they're basically amassing a giant amount of data, and they're scanning it for intelligent signals. And it's been going on. The SETI at home, they use laptops as basically a big distributed computer, and they bite off a chunk, and then your screensaver is looking in the background for alien life. Right, basically like the alien signals. So.
But it's supposedly using underutilized capacity, right?
That's right.
Whereas the cloud is only supposed to be you pay for the capacity you use.
Right.
So there's a commerce model associated with the cloud, whereas SETI is a completely free sort of holistic P2P. Everybody's sharing together, right?
Yeah.
So then I would argue that it's useless for the cloud because there's no money.
It's a great question.
That's very practical.
Time-sensitive information, then maybe, but the fact that they're leveraging all this unused computer cycles that people are donating, and I was one of them. They actually crunched through the backlog of data they had a long time ago.
Okay.
I think now folding at home is like the new thing for that.
So, but the thing is, they're collecting an extraordinary amount of data from space and holding on to it before they distribute it out to these distributed processing units that were laptops. And so that may be a perfectly reasonable thing to use in the cloud, right? Why, because what you want is to store a bunch of data, have it processed, get an answer, throw it out. And so it could easily be the case that a cloud storage solution would be a great use for that piece of the process.
Yeah, I think, in my mind, I was thinking that, it's one of these classic things I think actually the cloud is really great for. And that if you have a very big data set that you're trying to crunch, and you don't own your own giant computing facility, that you can very quickly build a large number cruncher, do your work, and then disassemble it, and then it's gone.
Right.
I'll give you a related example.
But just not SETI.
I'll give you a related example. I don't know that I can name the company, but pharma company wants to analyze chemical compounds.
Very good example.
There's a way to do to simulate organic chemistry reactions with it. I think it's an open source algorithm. Right now they have a.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah. It's actually super cool stuff. I'm getting deeper into all the life chemistry stuff to learn more how that works. But right now they have a bank of computers, and scientists fight over who gets to be in the queue, and there's a way to move jobs off and prioritize things. With the way to put it in the cloud, the question is no longer how long it takes, it's how much it costs.
Right.
Because you can always have it be done in 2 hours.
Right.
Right? Is now you have a bunch of MBAs looking at, if we run this computational task, it might yield the following results. Is it worth our money to figure that out? So now so what's happening is there's a budgeting system on top of the cloud computing resources, and it's not about who's where in line. Is do you have permission to run the following test? And what they do is they run hundreds and thousands of permutations of different carbon-based compounds combining with each other. And the most promising ones, they actually have somebody in the lab mixing chemicals to see if it is in fact what they thought it was going to be.
Very interesting.
So this has been happening
Yeah.
for a while, by the way. It's not new. Again, was what I'm saying is there's a lot of stuff out there that is not widely known yet.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to change this segment now. I'm going to ask you guys what you think are great candidates for the cloud.
There you
And
go.
turn it the other way around. So, David, what do you think is a great? Do you have anything in your portfolio that you think is a great, I don't know, cloud applicable solution?
You know, I think blogging services are great. Are a great example where there are a bunch of disparate pieces that have to be pulled together, but it's not, you know, but a lot of it can easily, if not all of it, can easily be done in the cloud. And I think that's true of a lot of these consumer web services where you know, yeah, I take your point about answers, but a lot of it is not about specific real-time data that isn't easy to pull, and so it's not wildly compute intensive, it's not wildly IO intensive. It's all so I think there are a host of things that should, you know, start out living in the cloud. I mean, you know, this is what I hear every day. Hey, David, your job is obsolete because we can get these things up and running for nothing, and it all runs in the cloud. So why do we need you?
Why do we need venture capitalists? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. We don't need VC because we
Why
can
do
get
we
it
need
running for
David?
$10,000 sitting in the cloud. And the reality is that's true, right? It's true that these web apps run very well in the cloud, and they can you can get them up and running quickly. And then, as we've discussed, the time when you need the venture business is when it's working, and you have to start considering some of these trade-offs. It's growing too quickly, or the data set is so massive that it doesn't make sense any longer, et cetera. But I think in the early days of these consumer web services, the cloud is an incredible resource, and everybody should be using it.
Yeah, so for probably, you know, once a company starts maturing, then they move out of the cloud or find a different way to architect it, I guess. So really, they're really telling you that they don't need venture capital because of the cloud.
Exactly. The cloud has killed me.
So they call you up and
Has
say
the
this?
cloud killed VC?
A lightning
I mean,
bolt came
when they
out of
walk
the
in your
cloud and hit
offices
it.
and it looks like Scrooge McDuck's bank, you know, do they? I mean, they just say no to the money. I mean, what happens?
We have all this money. Take it.
Yeah. All right.
Like I said, you know, ultimately when your servers are on fire, then you call me. So it's all good.
Any other ideas on what's good?
If I can throw one in there, it's going to sound like a little bit like a non-answer answer, is what we haven't thought of yet. And what I mean is we always take the new technology but do the same old thing. We're still deploying the same kind of applications and building them the same way, even though we have this massive access to tremendous infrastructure now.
Yeah.
And we see this repeated over and over. Go a few years back, when the newspapers finally decided to build websites, they did the same old thing. They only published once a day because they were used to printing presses and trucks.
Right.
And they published and they didn't pay attention to comments because they were used to column inches being a scarce resource. And it took them a long time to figure out it was a brand new medium. We're still doing the same old thing even though we have this massive access to compute resources. And we see it over and over. When they invented the film camera in the late
Yeah, I get
1800s,
it. So what do you think the analogy is in the computing universe?
I think we need people that are in computer science classes right now in college or maybe as young as high school that don't grow up with the same kind of model of how you build
So
infrastructure.
think
that we
cloud
have.
native as opposed to trying to imitate a data center.
People that will grow up thinking of massive systems, not of how do I write an application that runs on one computer.
Or dynamically, you know, so based on
Right.
the size of the infrastructure grows and shrinks possibly as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, which is not something we're used to thinking about.
We see that every day. We do the same
Good
old
point.
thing, except we do it with these different systems that we have now.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
So the only two areas or businesses or categories I think would really be benefit from the cloud would be two parts of the government. One, I'd say national security. The idea of, you know, all the data that needs to get crunched when they listen to phone calls and do all this stuff. I mean, to have the ability to literally maybe it's not an MBA who's doing the analysis, but somebody say this is a national security threat. I'm going to go ahead and utilize all this resource that's out there to very quickly identify an issue and deal with it. I'd also say for big one-time events that happen every couple of years, like the census.
Yeah.
Why does the government go and deploy these huge data centers and spend a lot of our tax money to do it? If the cloud's there, census, pull the information together, it takes a few months, crunch it, and then move on. I can guarantee you there's probably 10 data centers deployed just to handle the census information.
You're probably right. And it's like that's a very good bursty thing. You only need it for part of the year.
Right.
Just bursty.
So there's bursts in time, there's bursts in data, there's all kinds of different ways in which it's bursty.
Okay.
Let's move on to, let's get to the news. We're running out of time.
We have news.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We're going to go to CloudKick. So, so this week in San Francisco, a San Francisco-based startup named CloudKick announced their cloud server management and monitoring services. So what they basically built is a unified dashboard for a panoply, if you will, of cloud services. So basically, if you buy from Amazon or you buy from Rackspace or GoGrid, SliceHost, VPS.net, all of these are covered in the single dashboard. So basically, you can monitor and control all your stuff, I guess, across all these multiple services. You look at it'll basically tell you about the CPU, bandwidth, memory, and load of all those different services. So, which is what I kind of wanted earlier, but I wanted more of a comparison. That someone had run this a little bit and could tell me, in general, this one's better at this one's better at that.
Well, they'll be the perfect people to answer that, right? If they get any kind of scale, then they'll be running a whole bunch of different applications. They'll be running them across a bunch of resources, and eventually, trust me, they will publish that report for the PR, and then you'll know the answer.
Yeah, no, that would be great. Everyone
We need
wins.
to get CloudKick on here.
So, question: does this provide enough transparency into the cloud?
No, I mean, come on, it's just a little dashboard.
You hate everyone, don't you? You just hate everyone. No,
It's
great.
not that I hate them.
Go ahead.
Seriously, it's a tiny little, okay, great, it tells me my CPU utilization, my
Yeah.
memory, and that's it. That's not what you really need to know. What about my network health? How well connected is this? How do I need to be in multiple locations? So if I'm with GoGrid and VPS and Rackspace, okay, great, but how am I performing in Yugoslavia, the Balkans, and Peru? Like I need a lot more information in a dashboard.
So you're missing. You're basically you're saying that the piece that they're missing is what Gomez. So basically, network stuff is not unless I'm not seeing it in the press release. Well, they do talk about bandwidth, but I guess not really the same thing.
Performance is a proxy for so many different things.
Yeah,
so
true.
you can see your CPU shoots up in one area and not in another. It doesn't tell you how your customers are experiencing that. If I know that the site's down or the site's slow in a specific area, I can isolate that to the vendor. I can determine what the problem is. But I first need that data point. I need that alert that tells me, wait a second, customers are having a bad experience.
Yeah.
So I think that's the point that's missing.
Okay. David, any thoughts on this?
No, I was just pulled it up and I see that these guys are Y Combinator graduates.
Yes.
They came out of Paul Graham's Y Combinator company. So, I can assure you that there are a host of these early Y Combinator companies who are having this problem, and these guys got a lot of feedback saying we really need to better understand this. And as I was saying, I mean, these are sets of applications that make a ton of sense to run in the cloud. So, it's a good question how big of a business is, how big of the feedback, but I would say that it's pretty clear these guys got a lot of feedback from their cohorts in past and existing Y Combinator programs to say we really need this if we're going to use cloud resources. So I think that it will likely address that sweet spot of the market.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to our next one.
Take the next one.
Sure, please.
So in December, Gartner analysts said that for at least 2012, enterprises will invest more money in building private clouds, while public cloud environments like those offered by Amazon, IBM, and Google mature. And then also we've got announcements from companies like HP that are now expanding their cloud computing portfolio with like their cloud design service that's for enterprises to design and deploy scalable cloud computing environments in a hybrid fashion. So hybrid is this term that we keep hearing, public versus private. So the question is, are private or hybrid clouds the answer to kickstart large-scale migration to cloud computing? Is it enough? And what other concerns need to be addressed?
It certainly looks like right now a lot of companies are making moves in that direction. It seems to be like a happy medium and a compromise for, I can tell, my board of directors or my CEO that we are doing something with the cloud where we can still maintain the control that we want.
Dipping our toes in the water.
Yeah. I suspect a
Is this
lot of
cloud washing?
Cloud washing.
I love that term.
Yeah.
That's going to be my new term. I
Yeah.
love that.
The king of cheese.
Yeah. Will it hold? So your earlier question was, is the cloud cheaper? And we were talking about that.
Yeah.
What I think is going to be very interesting to watch over the next few years is a lot of these companies will build their private clouds. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And there'll be different vendors. HP, you mentioned, there's a whole host of them.
But if I build my own private cloud, isn't that my own data center?
Yeah, in this,
Exactly. That's the question. What's the distinction,
That's
right?
the bigger question.
yeah, you get into semantics, right? Are you taking advantage of virtualization?
Look, I have a
Are
cloud.
you using a cloud appliance?
I have a desktop cloud right here.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
So I agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cloud washing
Yeah.
on that one. But let's say that a lot of companies they build their private, quote unquote, clouds. But 3-4 years will go by, maybe less, and I suspect CFOs will say, how much? What was our operational cost for this? And what would that have been had we gone with one of these infrastructure providers? And let's actually do an in-depth and real analysis of in-house versus farming it out. But it's going to take years to really work that out.
Yeah.
That's what I think. To really know, can you drive the same kind of cost basis that you could if you're getting it externally?
What
Okay.
do you think, James?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think things like CDN, things like storage, things like experimental sort of flexible capacity are definitely the most immediate things to outsource. But for the rest, to me, it's just web hosting, and it's just call it shared hosting, call it virtual hosting, call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
It's web hosting. You buy a bunch of servers, deploy some software on it, and it runs your infrastructure. Yeah.
David?
Right.
Great. Next. You want to read the next one?
Is the death of the data center exaggerated? Will the cloud be the demise of the data center? That's the big question. You've got the people who say yes, that say, well, of course it's the death of the data center because utility computing is the way to go. And then you have people saying, well, no, you've got companies actually building more data centers. Like, for instance, Facebook's building a data center in Oregon. You have IBM building one in North Carolina. Amazon and Google are also expanding their data center presence. So are cloud computing services the death of the data center?
I think it's really important to understand that the cloud is not in the sky.
Yeah,
it is actually physically on the earth. It is on the earth.
Yeah.
So it actually sits in a data center, and there's more data centers.
Like, what is if Amazon needs more
Exactly.
capacity, why don't they just use the Amazon cloud? I get it.
Yeah. And you know what? Power is the biggest problem we're all running into. I think we all know from the infrastructure space, power is the most expensive commodity that we're dealing with. So I don't know that the cloud necessarily uses it more efficiently. And that's the problem we're all running into. So no, data centers are a great business.
Yeah, basically, these are all data centers. When it really comes down to it, there is no
Everything
cloud.
is data centers.
Everything is
This
just
is
a data center.
definitely another semantics question, right? I mean, so all we're doing is getting verticalization. Oh, now it's a storage data center. Now it's a compute data center. But it's just a data center. In fact, when you said, Microsoft and Yahoo and Amazon are increasing their data centers, well, particularly Amazon and Microsoft are increasing them so they can host other people's stuff. So
Exactly.
in the cloud. So nothing's dying. Actually, in fact, it's blossoming. There are more and more and more square feet of compute and storage capacity, and it's only going to get either worse or better depending on how you look at it.
It might be kind of like the TV didn't kill radio; they both coexisted, just kind of shifted the balance there.
Yeah, I mean, cloud does sound nice and green, though, even though we know with all these data centers, we're killing the environment. But at least, it sounds good because it's the cloud.
It does sound green.
You pour some water on it, and it grows nicely. It's nice.
Does anybody know where the term came from?
Which cloud?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
don't
a
know,
good
actually.
trivia question. Do you know your?
I have my opinion based on my telco background. I don't know that I can prove that is correct, but back when you were designing frame relay networks, and there were DELCs, where you had to tell the customer how their data
Look
would
at you
travel.
copping old school.
When your frame relay network,
Got a lot of that today.
you would create a map with all the DLCs, the data link connection indicators, and you would draw them in a cloud. And inside the cloud, you would draw how it connected within the provider's network.
Yeah, you would draw like conceptually.
You would
on the
actually draw a
schematic.
cloud, and then you would show how everything connected. because they didn't have to worry about what was inside that cloud.
Right.
They just had to get all the delcies right.
It's like a bunch of stuff's in here. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And you drew it as a cloud.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's exactly what it is, but from my past,
I remember it
that's what
being.
I
I
saw.
took computer science in college, which was like in the 80s.
We're always drawing
The
clouds.
books, yeah, there was always like the illustrations. Always said, and here's the cloud.
Yeah, means don't worry about it.
Yeah, just don't worry about it. Just there's a wire going up there and it like goes somewhere. It doesn't
I mean,
worry.
on the cave wall, they had a cloud.
Yeah. Yes, back in the Roman Empire.
The tablet said clearly.
Did you see what he wore at Halloween?
There was a pneumatic
Anyway.
tube that went into the. Anyway.
So just to wrap up that piece of it, it seems like one thing that we've been hearing throughout the entire show is that semantics are a big part of this. There's a lot of noise in the market. There are a lot of people clamoring to jump on the cloud bandwagon. A lot of analysts are saying this is still exploding, so everyone wants a piece of the pie, but we need to define things better.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to just provide a recap of that piece of it.
Okay.
Yeah, well, hopefully you guys are going to do it on this show, right? Do a little bit
That's what
of
we're
a
aiming
definition.
for.
So defining this stuff, I think we're chipping away.
If you
at
can
it.
help with the confusion that exists out there, that would be great.
Well, I think we've started by saying there is no cloud, it's just a bunch of data centers.
Nice.
So there we go. All right, so I'm actually going to combine two stories here for the next one. There's kind of two that they're sort of related. The first one is Microsoft. A couple days ago, Microsoft and HP announced a joint significant partnership. They're jointly investing $250 million in a cloud computing venture. So it's basically taking. Let me see if I can find that. Sorry,
Does that mean they're
I have
buying
my pages
HP
out of order
servers
now.
for the Azure?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, pretty
Yeah.
much for the Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud computing platform. It's all going to be on HP hardware. So that's story number one. Story number two: HP takes the consulting fight to IBM with cloud design service. So HP again is basically offering a consulting business, much like IBM's.
Right.
Basically
They're expanding their
consulting
cloud
with companies
portfolio.
and setting up clouds. So HP is being really aggressive. So question: how successful will HP be on these multiple fronts? Are they a serious player in the cloud universe? Have they been? Will they be? Given these two stories, does this mean anything? Does it mean nothing?
Well, they want to sell more hardware, right? And
Sure.
So the more people who use computing, regardless of whether it's a proprietary dedicated server or whether it's cloud-based, they've got to be supportive of that no matter what. So
Now, do you guys use any HP hardware?
no.
I would venture, Mark, that those announcements and those moves are aimed at really large enterprises.
Yeah.
There's no startup that's going to be taking advantage of it. These are for those multi-million-dollar professional services engagement for international companies that have to do some major
So they're playing big
projects.
ball against IBM, and
Do you guys use HP?
we do not. So
I'd be curious if folks on chat, like, what's the vibe on HP? I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting. We didn't
it
even
is
look
weird.
at them.
Yeah. It's sort of like outside of our universe. I don't know why.
I think of them as
makes-
expensive and not necessarily,
Well,
what I
people
would
used to
look
think
for.
of Sun like that too, and Sun has sort of come back, and
Yeah.
they're back on the map again. At least some people are using it.
I mean, we're a Dell shop, and it works great, and
Yeah.
it's inexpensive and reliable. So
I think that's a professional services play, in my opinion, what the story that you
Yeah.
were
What do you,
talking about.
Dave, what do you think about this?
No, I don't. This is so removed from my world that. But I will say this: it's not like they're on the radar for startups to figure out how to do this. I think that there have been some big companies that have done a better job of trying to pitch to early stage companies to kind of build on top of their infrastructure. As you say, Sun was putting in a big push, although I don't think they got quite the traction compared to Amazon, which really owns this space, and then Google. So I think they got both Microsoft and HP have a long way to go. Certainly HP well more than Microsoft. So I think it's good for them to get in the game.
Yeah, it's just funny how sort of off the radar they are.
yeah,
Like I bring them up, everyone's silent, just crickets.
Sure.
So I didn't really expect that. But anyway.
Maybe they should sponsor this show.
They might. You know what? Maybe
There
they
we
should.
go.
Might be a good idea.
Well, on that note, I think we've covered quite a bit of ground here. Thank you so much, guys. Have James Siegel over here, Edgecast, Yuri Budnick with Right Scale, and of course, virtually on Skype, David Hornick with August Capital.
And also want to thank Verticor, our
And
sponsor.
Verticor, our sponsor
Yes,
for this
Verticor.com.
show.
So we're already sponsored, which is fantastic.
Verticor.com. Make sure
And
you
we've
check them out.
actually been using them for some stuff I can't talk about yet, but the service has been. Hey, don't laugh, David. Come on.
We're using them, but we can't talk about it.
We're doing the David
wanna
Stern.
say.
We're doing exactly what you suggest, and you're laughing at me. What's up?
I can't possibly involve any makeup.
Can't believe this. Anyway,
We don't have a Tyler cam on this show, but we do have a David cam.
Yes. Yeah, David's our new Tyler. Our new Sand Hill
I'll
Road
just be
based
here
Tyler.
available to smile on
Our
every
VC
show.
cam.
Yes. So no, in all seriousness, Verticor service has been awesome. and we've been really delighted with it.
And we'll talk about it more when we can.
We will indeed.
Verticore.com. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, if you're not already, it's TWiCloudComp on Twitter.
And then the hashtag is
Hashtag's just pound cloud computing.
Yep.
Very simple. Although we should say pound data center. Anyway.
After this show, maybe.
So thank you everyone who's joined us here with our first episode of This Week in Cloud Computing.
We'll see you next week.
See you.
Thanks, everyone.